This is R4E, the Reason for Everything podcast with Arjan Peters. I'm your host, Arjan. In this episode, I sat down with Austin Tatum, a close friend and an individual who has had an unbelievably important impact on the trajectory of my life. Austin is currently a higher education consultant, and today's discussion is focused on making decisions with a sense of agency. We walk through his last-minute decision to go to grad school, advice for moving to new cities, finding community, and more. I'm excited for you to listen to this one. Enjoy this episode of R4E. Let's dive in. Mr. Tatum, how are you today?
What's up, Arj? I'm good. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for joining today. Really appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you. It's my first podcast ever.
All right. Well, no pressure or anything. So as you know, I ask my guests to pick a walk-up song. You picked Come On Baby Cry, Orville Peck. And so would love to understand why you picked that song, what it means to you. I haven't heard it, honestly. And so I'm excited to listen to it in post-production, but would love to get me in the headspace for this song and what I can be expecting.
Yeah. All right. So picture it. You're in like a Nashville country dive bar. It's a song by Orville Peck. It's called Come On Baby Cry. He's a young gay country singer. So just on principle, I love that he kind of is like bucking all the stereotypes about country music. But I love this song because he does it in like a very nostalgic traditional country style. He's got a very like Elvis-y Johnny Cash voice, and you hear the song and it sounds super like classic country. But it's a super fun song, and the message is all about kind of like debunking this myth that like men can't cry. So the whole premise of the song is him like reaching out to like a friend or a lover or someone and being like, nope, come on, like it's okay, just like cry, feel your emotion, be vulnerable. So super catchy song, love the message, just like really cool, really fun.
That's awesome. That sets us up nicely for a little bit about you and kind of how we know each other. So for everyone listening, so Austin and my older brother, Bijan, are good friends from school. But yeah, maybe you can give us just a quick nutshell of your journey from growing up in Tennessee to Blacksburg, and we can go from there. Maybe just any highlights, any asterisks you want to share about growing up in Tennessee, and we can go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm 29. I'll be 30 this summer, which is wild. I spent the first, I guess, 17-ish years of my life in East Tennessee. So I grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is right outside Knoxville, near like the Smoky Mountains, North Carolina border. Did my entire childhood was there. Mom, dad, one younger brother, like pretty typical family. Did all the way through high school in Knoxville, and came to Virginia Tech for school after that. I remember thinking I knew I wanted to like go out of Tennessee. I wanted to get away a little bit, like far enough that my parents couldn't just pop in and surprise me, but like close enough that I could get home if I needed to. So that's what landed me at Virginia Tech. I looked a few places, but when I went on campus at Tech, just absolutely loved it, fell in love immediately, and it felt like a place I wanted to be. And it was an incredible 4 years. I don't regret the decision at all.
I think for anyone listening that hasn't been to Blacksburg or has only seen pictures of or driven on 81, you probably have a pretty clear image of what Blacksburg might be, but it really is such a special place, and there's only kind of one way to know that, and that's to spend time down there. And even for me, when we were touring and seeing other schools, it doesn't have some of the same appeal as other schools did, and it's not that close to home for me. It doesn't have major grocery stores, doesn't have anything other than some amazing sports from the face value of it. And then actually spending time in Blacksburg, my whole world has changed. But I mean, to set the stage even further, so when I was in high school was the first time I had the chance to meet you while you were at Tech, and we were both part of the same social club at different times, and even part of the class ring program as well. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on here, is because kind of the underlying thread of my college experience was really kind of woven in from your mentorship and just like having you as a role model while I was in high school and going into college. And so that's why I was really excited to have you on here. So yeah, we'd love to maybe jump in a little further and understand like your experience at Tech, what you studied, what kind of be some of the ring design backing might have been, and then how that helped you to get your first, I guess, Vandy jump out of school.
Yeah. Yeah. Tech was an awesome experience for me. I came in not with a ton of clarity about what I wanted to do with those 4 or 5 or 6, I didn't know however many years. And I started as a communications major. And I remember my dad being like, "You're going to an engineering school to be a communications major. Sweet." um, and I was like, "Yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of heinous to me as well." But I felt just like a draw to the place. And I knew that I could like find my way there once I committed. So the communications did not last long. I studied biology, psychology, and political science, and so I kind of like dabbled in a lot of stuff, which is it's a strange combination. But I found what I thought was a real love of neuroscience. So like in the class, I was taking these psychology courses and biology courses that were all about like the psychology of the brain and like neuroscience. And so I loved those. I like super poured myself into those classes. And I would say I got a really solid education that I enjoyed. I probably spent too much time doing like outside of the class stuff, the all the stuff that I know Arjan through and how I met your brother Beige. Yeah, I did. I was in the German club, which was like a social organization. Was involved in like class leadership programs, helped design my class ring, which when I like think back on that now, I'm like, that's one of the coolest things I've ever gotten to do. Like not many people have a chance to say like for their 3,000 person graduating class, you got to help lead the design of the class ring that they're all wearing still. Like pretty insane. But that was one of my probably coolest experiences. Met a lot of really amazing people. When I think back on my community at Tech, a lot of them came from that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ring program at Tech, for those who aren't familiar with it, I guess they changed it now actually. So while Austin and I were at school, each graduating class, there were like elected or like designated folks that were able to help design and influence what the kind of two-sided class ring would look like for their entire graduating class. And so for us in 2015, for myself in 2019, we had the opportunity to be involved in that. And ironically, in kind of cleaning my desktop today before this conversation, I had a bunch of like my old schematics from designing the ring. I just happened to serendipitously like bump into on my desk or like run into on my desktop, and then saw some of those old designs. And that whole process was kind of a blur because, to your point, on top of everything in the classroom, all the extracurriculars, and actually going and building this design of a ring, you also had to like pass your classes and such. So and all the emotional energy that goes into being a 18 to 22-year-old. And so all that say, I mean, I look back on it so fondly, and I feel like this is a great creative outlet for me to be able to kind of leverage a lot of the skills I didn't even think that I still kind of like had in the arsenal for putting this podcast together. But yeah, that was a kind of a helpful rundown of your Tech experience, and would love to understand. So you had a pretty multifaceted undergrad career from an academic perspective. You graduate in 2015. What was next steps for you?
Yeah, so this is, as I was prepping for this, I realized this was probably one of the first points in my life I can remember feeling a ton of pressure about a huge decision and like finding like the right decision and the reason for that decision. I remember this is the first time I kind of agonized over something like that. So I guess right before my senior year, summer before my senior year, I worked in a neuroscience lab. I did like a summer internship, and my plan had been to do that, use that as a foot in the door for grad school. And I did some really incredible work, like super validating, really, really incredible team that I got to work with, awesome project. But I can specifically remember the day that summer I was sitting in the lab, and my job that day was to weigh the lab mice. And I remember sitting there thinking like, this is just not it. Like, it's
Hmm.
not it for me, and like it's not what I want to do. It's cool and fulfilling for now, but like it was the first like light bulb moment I'd ever had like that, where I knew like
Interesting.
that's not the route that I wanted to take. And I'm super grateful for it, but it kind of sent me like into a tailspin, because 2 weeks later I started my senior year of college, and I was like, I don't know what this means for what I've just been doing for the past 3 years. I don't know what it means for my next step. I have no clarity about what I want to do, but I know what I don't want to do. So that was pretty jarring. And I went through a process right at the beginning of my senior year of a lot of kind of soul searching, a ton of conversations with student and like faculty, adult mentors in my life, to help me just gain some clarity about like, where do I go from here. And what that basically yielded was, I realized that a lot of the things I had enjoyed about my college experience were the communities I was part of and that I was helping to build, the way that I was growing as an individual and as a leader at the traditional kind of 18 to 22-year-old college phase of my life.
Right, right.
Um, and so when I started to put all of these things together, I had a mentor at Virginia Tech that said, well, like you can work in higher education. Like, if you love these things about your educational experience, like higher ed is a profession. Like, you can be a faculty, or you can be a staff member or an administrator or a leader on a college campus. Like, this is a thing you could do with your life and your career trajectory. And that was, I guess, like light bulb part two. I was like, it didn't even occur to me that that was a possibility. And the bulb kind of went off, and I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, I love college students. I love the college environment. I love the development that happens at this stage of people's lives. I want to be part of that in some way. So that all happened right at the beginning of my senior year. And I basically had like a tiny 1 month window to apply for grad programs in higher ed administration. That's the route that I decided I wanted to go. So I had like a literal 1 month window to like
Crazy.
repurpose my resume, like rethink everything I had always thought I wanted to do, and apply for a bunch of learn about grad programs, learn enough about the field to sound like literate in my applications, and then submit applications. But that's the route that I decided to go.
That, yeah, I had no clue. It's pretty crazy. I feel like there's so many people that have uh that same experience after junior year, when you have that like real internship. I'm saying that in air quotes, where you're actually like testing out. Because I feel like that's a lot of times, at least in the business world, that's the only time they accept, most of the businesses that you'd actually want to go and get a job at, they actually accept the rising seniors. And so there's so many people I've had this similar conversation with, where they didn't realize it till they're going into senior year. And I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if it's a systematic issue, or if it's like a systematic issue on the sake of the universities, or if it's businesses, or both, that aren't getting them in the pipelines, or not letting them into the businesses sooner. But that's a pretty crazy turnaround, to go from having that kind of existential decision then, and then having 1 month to decide. Did you have full conviction that grad school was the route you wanted to take, or were you still kind of on the fence when you had talked to your mentors, they suggested higher ed? Like, what was your headspace like at that time?
Yeah, no, I was able to decide pretty quickly that grad school was the route I wanted to go. I think that is a common entry point for jobs in the higher ed profession, and so it made sense. And it was literally a brand new concept to me, so I was like, I don't even know how I would begin to try and just to secure an entry level job, right? Like,
Right, right.
I need something like a grad program to help me get a foot in the door, get a base level of knowledge and understanding, and then reaffirm that this is what I want to do. So um yeah, once I had figured that out, it was pretty easy.
Do you ever think about, if you hadn't like made that jump or taken that risk to apply to grad schools and just kind of follow the path? Do you think about that ever?
So I don't think about that, because again, it was like when the light bulb went off, it went off, and I knew, and I had clarity that I didn't have previously.
Mm.
The path I do always wonder about is when I went through the grad school application process. I ended up at Vanderbilt, but Penn State was the other school that I almost ended up at. And this was the agonizing decision I mentioned earlier. Was like, I remember thinking, like, I've made this decision about the career I want to go into. I have two options in front of me. One of them's the right one and one of them is not, and I've got to like choose the right one. And that decision like almost killed like 21-year-old me. Like, it was so intense, I remember.
What ended up being your deciding factor between the two schools? Uh both similar schools, I guess, at some levels, but what was your decision criteria for picking Vandy over Penn State?
Honestly, I think it was just the program. When I thought about what I wanted out of the program, I was going to get more of that, I think, at Vanderbilt. Um, and then there was a piece of it that's, if, for those who don't know, Penn State and Virginia Tech are pretty similar
Right.
institutions. They're both like big rural public land grant schools. And I do remember having the thought of like, this is your chance to push yourself, Austin, like to do something different, to go somewhere different, like jump out of your comfort zone a little bit. And so I actually do remember that being a part of the decision.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Like kind of extending out of your comfort zone into the zone of the unknown to help grow is probably a good thing to do as a 21, 22-year-old. So you ended
Yeah.
up down that path, brought you to Nashville, fast forwarding, I guess, what, a year and a half to fall of 2015, 2016, right?
Yeah. I graduated tech in May 2015, started grad school that fall.
Okay. So you're in Nashville, you born and raised in Tennessee, but obviously Nashville is very different than the Knoxville area. So what was that like going to Nash Vegas as a 22-year-old? I'm sure was extremely fun, but how was living down there? I'm actually going for the first time in a couple of weeks here, but I've actually never been to Nashville. So get me up to speed on what that was like for you as a 22-year-old.
Yeah. I'll give you the recommendations before you
Please.
go. It's absolutely incredible place. And it took me a while to realize that. So I did grow up in East Tennessee, and my dad's family's from Nashville. So I actually grew up going to Nashville and being around it. But the shift of like now being, I guess, quasi adult or an adult living on my own there was really jarring. And I remember thinking like, Nashville's a huge city. Like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not cut out for this, especially coming from like little Blacksburg. Um, and so I was pretty terrified, but it was also a huge mix of scared and optimistic and excited and anxious. And um, I mentioned I had the clarity about like what I wanted to study and what I wanted to do for work. So that was exciting. And then I was holding that in this at the same time as like the anxiety of being on my own and having I guess officially a job for the first time. I worked while I was in grad school on campus, and um, starting fresh after I had just come off of the best 4 years of my life, and I had a huge community in undergrad, and
Right.
all of those things kind of mixed and blended. And I remember being absolutely like shit scared before my first day of class. It was like a kindergartner walking into class and being like, what if no one likes me? Like,
Kindergartner with a mustache at that time or no?
couldn't grow the mustache at that point.
So you're in Nashville. How long was this program for you then?
2 years.
Okay. So you settled into the big city of Nashville. Were you kind of balancing that or juggling that clarity and anxiety of moving to a new city for a while, or did that kind of subside pretty quickly once settling into your program?
Yeah, I think I settled into my program faster than I expected.
Mhm.
I had made a couple of really, really good buddies who are still two or three of my closest friends to date. So I found community pretty quickly. I did get the validation I was looking for, that what I was studying is what I wanted to do. So I felt like confidence about my career trajectory. And then I guess I can't really talk about Nashville without the other big piece of that journey, which was that's the first time I ever started to explore like coming out. And so at the same time as I was doing the work and the study stuff, I was finally letting myself like ask questions about my identity and my sexuality and stuff like that. So um, that was a huge piece of the 2 years in Nashville, was starting to explore that.
Yeah, absolutely. Was that any kind of component of you staying or leaving Nashville after Vandy? Or what was that timeline look like after you finished school? Did you end up staying in Nashville longer? Or did you go straight to Chicago?
Yeah, I went to Chicago, basically same kind of thing as from undergrad to grad school. I finished grad school in May, and then I had taken a job that required me to move to Chicago. So yeah, I think I had the summer after I graduated, and then I moved up to Chicago pretty quickly.
Did you feel any sort of resistance or hesitancy after kind of settling into Nashville, exploring this identity that you're kind of sharing with the world for the first time, leaving Nashville where you'd kind of set down new foundations and then kind of uprooting that again and going to Chicago? Did any part of you want to stay in Nashville?
Oh yeah, 100%. I literally almost didn't take the job because I was like, I don't want to go to Chicago.
Really?
Yeah, I can remember talking to my parents and like weighing the decision, and they were like, I don't understand why you haven't said yes. You sound like you were super excited about the job. It's exactly in alignment with what you want to do. You feel like your time in Nashville is kind of done, but like, why don't you want to go? And we realized I was just terrified of the big transition to a place like Chicago. I mean, I mentioned I thought Nashville was a big city when I moved
I was
there.
gonna say,
Chicago,
yeah.
Chicago is like the freaking big leagues, man. So yeah, it was super scary.
Yeah. So what was that transition like? So you went from that big city of Nashville to Chicago. I imagine there was just a lot of yeah, I guess send back, that was probably what, 2017, 2018. So still had some time before the pandemic to like kind of get your roots and some sense of normalcy in Chicago. But what was that like going to another new city, bigger than Blacksburg or Nashville or anywhere in East Tennessee? Were you kind of ready for the anxieties of a new city after going to Nashville, or what was your kind of headspace? What were you thinking at that time making that move?
Yeah, I guess if the purpose of this podcast is everything happens for a reason, I think part of why I was able to be successful in Chicago was because of the smaller steps I had taken
Mm.
prior. So leaving East Tennessee to go to college 4 hours away, leaving the small rural college town to do grad school in Nashville, all of those, I think, prepared me in ways that I didn't realize to really embrace the transition. What was the biggest transition at that point in my life to date? Um, so it was scary, but I think by the time I like pulled the trigger, had found an apartment up there, was like actually loading the moving truck and going, I was super excited for my job, so I was more optimistic than I was nervous. I had kind of recommitted myself to like be an out, open, like gay man. So I was coming into my identity in ways that I hadn't previously. All of those things kind of solidified, and I saw Chicago as my chance to make like a clean transition and a new start. And I think all of those things together made it more exciting than it was scary.
Yeah, and what a great city to jump to. And I want to dive into your Chicago experience in a minute here. But thinking back on what you were saying about the pivotal, scary decision you made when you were 21 between Penn State and Vanderbilt, especially knowing if you would have known then that your next jump was going to be to a city like Chicago, I imagine that the Vandy transition would have been a no-brainer, because going from, to your point, rural state school being Virginia Tech and Blacksburg to State Park and Penn State, going from Penn State to Chicago is going to probably be a much more difficult leap than going from Nashville to Chicago.
Yeah, 100%. That leap would have been tough, I think. But the other thing I do sometimes still like toss around in my head is this like funny idea of like, I don't even know if Chicago and this job and what I'm doing now like would have even happened if I had
Hmm.
taken that other route. Like in hindsight, I'm like, I don't think like Nashville was the right route and Penn State was not. I think I could have formed like an equally viable path if I had chosen that. But who's to say if I would have like found my company that I work for now and had the occasion to move to Chicago, like
Yeah.
I could be talking to you from somewhere totally different right now.
That's the essence of why I like these conversations. It's crazy to think about to pull in a Marvel, like the multiverse of different trajectories that all of us could have had, or maybe have in a different dimension or something. I don't know.
100%.
But yeah, I guess so. Jumping back in, so you moved to Chicago. You were, to your point, kind of really kind of settling into your own. What was it like being in Chicago? I mean, I know we were talking before we started filming here. A lot of people my age that graduated undergrad in 2019 ended up having only 8-9 months to really kind of settle into new lifestyle, to post grad, friend groups, new point of life before the pandemic hit. So you had a little bit of runway before anything COVID entered our world. So what was that like, kind of settling into a big city and probably thinking that was going to be maybe where you're going to settle down for a bit, or what were you thinking at that point?
Yeah, I as excited as I was, and I definitely embraced that. I did always in the back of my head know that Chicago wasn't where I wanted to be long term. I didn't know when I was going to put the kind of the period at the end of the Chicago chapter and then move on. But I always had in the back of my mind, like I had to move to Chicago because my job required it. But I was like, as soon as I have the opportunity, I want to eventually make the decision to go where I want to go. That'd be like the first time I'd ever done that. So that was always in the back of my head, but I say I pretty fully leaned into the Chicago experience as much as I could. I work at a consulting firm, and so my first 3 years in Chicago pre-pandemic were on the road travel every single week. So I was doing like the Monday through Thursday traveling across the country and wherever my client was. So I basically had like 72 hours every week to enjoy Chicago and take advantage of it. And I did as much as I could. That's the first time I really threw myself into the dating pool. I had a partner at the time for some of the time I was in Chicago. Literally knew almost no one, so I had to start my friend circle from scratch. That's part of when I realized that I was as much of an introvert as I am. I would come home from our 4 days of travel for work and be exhausted, and I really learned during those 3 years to lean into my introvertedness and just appreciate like downtime and time to myself. Got super plugged into a church while I was there. I was teaching like 4th grade Sunday school, and I had like an awesome group of friends at church. So like I really pushed myself to like say yes to things, put myself out there, and like try to establish some roots. And I can talk later about why that was successful in some ways and not successful in others. But I definitely leaned in as much as I could.
Yeah, what I guess so you had the church as an outlet there, but for other folks hopefully listening that are settling into a new city and trying to make friends, kind of branch out, how were you able to do that? Maybe like whether it was the church or elsewhere, what were you doing? You said you were saying yes to a lot. I know there's intramural sports, there's tons of different activities you could do, but what were some of the things you're doing to kind of branch out and build that friend group even as an introvert?
Yeah, I think one, most importantly, I would say is just like first and foremost, knowing my boundaries. The first like year I was there, it was literally like yes to everything. And I was like, I just don't operate this way. I'm exhausted, I'm drained, and I'm not getting out of this what I need, because it's the social stuff is just more draining than it is filling.
Right.
So I had to first and foremost just like realize some boundaries. And once I did that, my church was a huge venue. I got plugged into like a young adult ministry that they were trying to launch there. So we had like a little 20 somethings leadership team, and we would plan stuff and lead worship, and I taught the Sunday school class and all that stuff. So that was a great like spiritual, emotional community for me. And then I think the other thing was I made like two or three really good friends at work, and they a couple of them were from Chicago, so they kind of just like slowly pulled me into their friend circles a little bit, which was super nice.
Yeah, that's terrific. That idea of like having your what yeah, well, I can't remember the saying is. It's like you can't fill up someone else's cup if yours isn't full yourself, and so
Totally.
that's like I feel like a huge thing for a lot of people, just before overextending yourself, is making sure that your basic needs are checked off, whether it's as simple as just spending time with yourself or by yourself and recharging, or as an introvert or as an extrovert, if it's being with people or being with people you care about to recharge. I feel like so many people in their 20s probably end up, myself included, end up just letting their batteries die out because they're just not recharging enough. And so I feel like that's probably a huge learning lesson for a lot of people. And I feel like a lot of people have probably gone through in their 20s too.
Oh yeah, and I had my fair share of that. Like I said, I learned it the hard way. I was like, I'm not going to be whole in my relationships and my job and all of these other parts of my life if I'm not taking time to realize, to like learn what I need to learn about myself, which for me was like set boundaries. You're an introvert, you need some recharge time. Those kinds of lessons were important for me to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that that consulting, like Monday to Thursday grind, is just absolutely brutal. And so would love to know, is that what you guys are still doing for work now, or how is that like for you?
Yeah, so I'm still at the same company 5.5 years later that I moved to Chicago for in 2017. It's still been an awesome place and super fulfilling for me. We're a mid-sized consulting firm. I specialize in higher ed consulting, so I get to use the higher ed masters and the background that I've got to work with colleges and universities every day, which I love. The mission resonates with me. It's been like super, super fulfilling work. Um, I did those first 3 years pre-pandemic, like the every week travel kind of deal, which was incredible. I've been
Right,
to
right.
San Francisco and Nebraska and Chicago and Tennessee and Texas, like all over, which was super, super cool. And now I do basically the same thing, but remote for the last like 2.5 years.
I'm sure there's some positives and negatives to that. Is that what relocated you to where you are today, which is Denver, I believe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was exactly it. I hit with the pandemic hit in, what was that, February, March 2020. And I was cooped up in my little studio apartment in Chicago. I already was feeling a little restless there and starting to feel like maybe the next chapter is coming. Didn't know what that was going to be, but I've always had a place like Denver on my mind. And this is, if the Vandy Penn State grad school decision was my first big like agonizing one, this was probably the second, because I remember my lease coming up like 5 or 6 months into the pandemic, and I was like, if I'm gonna go, like this is my chance to go. Otherwise, I'm here for another year. Who knows how long the pandemic's gonna happen? Like,
Right, right.
got to do it if I'm gonna do it. And I remember just like I had pro con lists. I was talking to everybody I could. I was like, I couldn't figure out how to make the decision. And as you've probably ascertained at this point, like just the way I was raised and the way my head worked was like, there's a right and a wrong here. Like, I either stay in Chicago and that's the right decision, or I leave Chicago and maybe that's the right decision, but it's not both.
Hmm.
Um, and I had one of my mentors at work actually shared a TED talk with me that was like, this was the light bulb moment in this situation. Um, and it's a TED talk all about reframing decisions. And it was basically like, it honestly, it kind of bucks the premise of everything happens for a reason, which is funny because like when you asked me to do this podcast, I was like, I actually don't know if I believe this. So maybe I'm gonna like debunk Arjan's entire
Oh
premise.
man.
um, but I think it is a version of that basically says like, you've got to get yourself out of the mind space that there is like a right and a wrong with every decision, or that there's like a predetermined like reason or purpose for everything, and realize that like as a human being, like you have agency to make a choice, follow a path, and then make that path meaningful. And so it sounds really simple, but when I heard that for the first time, I was like, 10,000% yes. Like, I could stay in Chicago and do my thing here, continue to carve a path for myself for who knows how many years, and probably make that purposeful and meaningful. I could also choose to get up and go to Denver, and it's like me taking ownership and agency of my life and myself. And if I want to do that, then I can find ways to make that purposeful as well. And I just remember when I started thinking that way, it literally felt like a pressure off my shoulders, or a weight off my shoulders. Like the pressure was just gone, and I felt less anxiety. I felt more excitement, and I was able to make this decision, which has now landed me in Denver.
That's great. I'll have to link that TED Talk in the show notes and get that speaker on to see if we can have some sort of positive negative magnet ends meeting each other or something.
Yeah, she's a philosopher named Ruth Chang. It's a TED Talk from several years ago.
I'll have to look up Ruth Chang after this. We'll see. Maybe we'll get her on one day. But but getting to your point, do you still use that framework in decision making today, or was that light bulb moment for you kind of the last kind of big existential kind of decision you made, or have you had to implement that framework any other time since you've been in Denver?
Yeah, I would say I use like I guess a mini application of that all the time. I'm like I said, I'm a super indecisive person, and I was unlearning years of this mentality of like there's a right and a wrong, there's a path you should choose and a path you should not. And so I just naturally don't make decisions well, and I use this all the time. We literally were like 2 weeks ago, we were doing a party with some friends, and it was onesie themed. And I literally spent like an hour on Amazon trying to pick a onesie. And I was like, no, stop, like make a choice, stand by it, and go with it. Like there's not a right or a wrong here. There's no reason for you to agonize over a decision like this. So like even down to stupid examples like that, like I use this framework to be like, you I think can create meaning and purpose out of any choice that you make. So I guess it's maybe that is a version of everything happens for a reason, or it's like if it's not everything happens for a reason, maybe it's like everything can be made purposeful.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm excited to actually listen to that TED Talk and see. And like I said, maybe I'll get Ruth on and we can go head to head or something. But
Yeah.
but nonetheless, so you end up making that decision. And to your point about 5 or 6 months into the pandemic, I mean, that was such a weird time, and it's even weird to be talking and having the pandemic as a bookend or timestamp for people, and the reality of for the rest of our lives we'll be talking about like and hearing about people's stories. Oh, in February, March 2020. So it almost seems surreal to be having a conversation and thinking about talking about decisions that were made because of this. It's still just as weird and strange to talk about. But that aside, that 5 or 6 month period into the pandemic, we're like, is this going to be, it wasn't just like the 2 weeks or 3 weeks and then returning to the office or returning to normalcy. That time of life was so strange where there was just so much uncertainty on top of everything else going on in the world. You're like, can I go outside again? And there was just so much going on. So you made that decision, I guess that would probably put you in like fall of 2020, you make the move out to Denver. What was that like for you? Did you know anyone else out there at the time? And what was that kind of like fourth transition city wise in your adult life like?
Yeah, it was wild. And now that you say that, I've never thought about it from the perspective of like the very unique circumstances of the pandemic. The global pandemic like created an opportunity for me to do this, and who knows if I would have otherwise. But I think it was, once I did it, it was mostly just excitement. I would say I had a handful of acquaintances out here.
Yeah.
Not a ton of people I knew really well, no family. It's super far from my family, who's all back still on the East Coast. But it was I mentioned earlier, this to me was the first time I was making a choice for my life that wasn't dictated by like, oh, you picked this grad school, so you're going here, or you signed with this job and they're requiring you to go here. And so that like autonomy, that agency was really, really exciting to me. So it was scary, and I was like, I'm not gonna have a chance to meet anyone because like nothing's open. We're still in the pandemic. Like,
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that.
I was like, I have no idea how I'm gonna make friends. I know 2 people out there, so I'm gonna like cash in on them for now, and hope that like we get along, because otherwise I don't know who I'm gonna hang out with. But it it was kind of scary, but mostly exciting, I would say.
I remember when we were, I guess, before we were recording this, you mentioned you were able to go up and ski and have Keystone so close. And I'd be curious, just growing up on the East Coast, jumping a couple of different cities, do you think you're gonna stay in Denver for a while, or what are you thinking now? Do you have any more of those decisions you can kind of have a sense of agency in coming up, or what are you thinking in terms of staying in Denver or relocating?
Yeah, it's been a really great place for me. And so for now and for the foreseeable future, I'm here. I think I've been able to plant roots here in a way that I don't feel like I ever quite did solidly in Chicago, because of we're, I guess, technically still in the pandemic, and my work's operating model has totally changed. And so I don't travel the way I used to, which has allowed me to, like, I have a boyfriend, I have a dog, I have a little house here. Like, my social network is stronger. I can do things like skiing on the weekends. And I think the combination of those things just has me feeling like very content. I was, even at my happiest points in Chicago, it was always in the back of my mind, like, what's the next step? What's the next move? Where do I want to be next? And I don't know. I don't feel that right now. Like, I'm finally like in a really good content space.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Hopefully, and I know it will continue for you too. And you brought it up earlier, so I'll double down on it. But you're turning 30 coming up soon. Do you have any aspirations before you turn 30? Any plans for your 30s you can think of off the top of your mind? Anything that's kind of nagging at you in the back of your head to expedite?
So I have been thinking about this a little bit lately. I've been with my company for over 5 years, and one of our benefits that we get, which is awesome, I'm so grateful for it, is once you hit 5 years, you get to take a 6-week recharge leave.
Cool.
So I'll get to take 6 weeks off. I've already got it on the calendar for this summer, and it's gonna cross over my birthday.
Nice.
So I'm super pumped for that. Like, close the laptop, don't touch it for 6 weeks. And we're planning to do like an Alaska trip with some of my family, which that's been like a bucket list trip for me for years. So I'm super, super pumped about that.
That's unbelievable. I mean, it goes back to our conversation earlier about recharging and having that time for yourself. That'd be really, really great.
Yeah. It's I don't know a lot of places that do something like that. So like I said, I'm super, super grateful for my employer for giving me that chance. And I'm gonna get to celebrate my 30th birthday while I'm off, and I'm gonna bookend the 6 weeks with this Alaska trip and with the Taylor Swift concert. So like, can't get any better.
No, that's unbelievable. I'm amazed we were able to get tickets, given all the craziness that went on with
I've
Ticketmaster and all
got
that. Which venue are you seeing her in?
She's playing at the Broncos Stadium out here in Denver.
Oh, nice.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's super cool. That's super cool. Yeah, I mean, it's it's cool to see kind of how this this, I guess, post-pandemic world or whatever view you're seeing this current state of day or whatever current state in is being like, because I feel like these concerts coming back, the sporting events back to some normalcy is really nice. And I almost feel like it's this kind of like full year of everyone being kind of comfortable with going, for the most part, going back and having some normalcy with travel and concerts and sports events is just, I feel like we took it all, a lot of us took it for granted pre-pandemic. And I feel like the good thing, I guess the silver lining is a better way to put it. The silver lining of all of it is I feel as though people are really enjoying and appreciating these kind of bigger events, these milestones, whether it be a birthday, when you're able to spend time with family, or concert that you're able to go to for an artist you like, or a sporting event. I feel like everyone's able to really kind of be more present and enjoy it because we weren't able to do it for so long. And I know that's been said, but I really feel like I need to hammer that silver lining home, because it's just, I find it so important.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I think, again, my tendencies are introverted, so I'm totally fine being alone and being by myself and recharging and having downtime. But it's definitely shown me, like, man, do not take for granted chances to be with your people and in your community, and like doing stuff that fills you up, because it's hard when you don't have those things. It's hard to charge that battery.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like that we keep coming back to that. I 100% agree. But I guess with that, I'd be curious if you have any sort of advice, any thoughts, any wisdom as a almost 30-year-old to share with with anyone listening, and then anything else to wrap with.
Zero wisdom, no wisdom to share. No wisdoms on deck. I think, as I think about becoming 30, I've always rejected this notion of like your life's over when you hit your 30s. Like your 20s are your best years, and they're behind you once you hit 30. I'm excited for it. I think we all have like learning and growing to do. The story that I've shared with you today, I think is like evidence of that, right? Like, even into your 30s, 40s, and beyond, like, you can reframe your mindset. You can tackle things differently. You can see things through someone else's eyes. And I guess that's not wisdom, but if that's what I could leave you with, I guess I would, is, keep yourself open to stuff like that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have made the decisions I did if I wasn't open to change and thinking differently. And when I look back on the arc of my life so far, the first 29 years, it's I'm grateful that I've taken the risks that I have, and they haven't always paid off. But that alternate path I was talking about is you can what if yourself to death thinking about that alternative path. But if you keep yourself open to the possibility of change and growth, I think it pays off.
You just walked us through that crazy story of, what was that, 8 years of your life. Imagine what that's going to be like in 30, 50, however many years from now, or even 5 years from now. How many other times are you going to need to use, what was it, what was the TED Talk person?
Okay. Yeah.
Dr. Jenks. How many more times are you going to need to use that framework in the next 5 years, and so on. So that's where I find these conversations interesting, and hopefully everyone else does too. And that this was 9 years of so many crazy inflection points and decisions that were made to get you to where you are today and on this show. And I think the cool thing is being able to look back of what has been, and then think about where you're going to be in 9 years from now, and you'll be 38 years old. That's probably crazy to think about, but
you didn't have to say that. You did not have to say that.
That was for Beach. That was just for Beach. But thinking about that, where I think it's just such a cool idea to kind of be having these conversations and have the opportunity to look back on this in however many years, and hopefully at least one, get a smile out of it, and two, hopefully someone gets some value out of this as well. So I appreciate you hopping on, and if there's anything else you want to share, the floor is yours. Otherwise, I'll catch up with you soon.
Nothing else for me. Thanks,
Awesome.
Arj.
Thanks for joining, Austin. Good talking to you. Cool.